Today, the House Oversight Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic held a hearing regarding the origins of COVID. So they've been exploring the COVID pandemic. They've been carting people into Congress and asking them a bunch of questions. And today they decided that they wanted to focus on the origins of the virus itself. And they wanted to hear from two scientists in particular. Those two scientists are Dr. Kristian Andersen. He's a virologist at Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, California. And they wanted to hear from Dr. Robert Garry. He's a professor for microbiology and immunology in the Tulane University School of Medicine. Now, the reason why they wanted to talk to these two guys in particular is because early on in the pandemic, at the end of January, these researchers, as well as a few handful of others, expressed to Fauci and to Collins at the NIH that they believed the virus was made in a lab. They believed that the virus had the markers of not being natural, but instead being man-made. They expressed their concerns to Fauci and to Collins. And interestingly, over the course of 3 or 4 days, suddenly these scientists changed their tune. Completely 180 shift. They went from, we think this might be a lab leak, to it's absolutely not a lab leak. And if you think it's a lab leak, you're a conspiracy theorist. That is what happened in the span of 3 to 4 days. Well, what we know now from the leaked emails, Fauci emails, is that in that 3 to 4 day window, there was a lot of back and forth between Fauci and these scientists. They held meetings with them. Fauci even did a bunch of research before holding meetings with these scientists. He even he scheduled a meeting with these guys at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He spent the beginning of the day researching the ties and the funding and grants with China and various research projects. They scramble, they get together with these scientists, they have conversations and back and forth conversations with them. And in the end, these scientists, as well as the others that were expressing any sort of concern that it may be lab leaked, that this may be man-made, suddenly quickly changed their tune. So now the House Oversight Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic was wanting to find out why in the world, what happened in the span of 3 to 4 days that caused you to suddenly change your mind and to no longer express that this was made in a lab. And then what we saw, of course, in that first year of the pandemic is that if you said lab leak, you were instantly called a conspiracy theorist. You were demonetized if you were on YouTube, or your videos were taken down off of Instagram. You were completely censored, called a conspiracy theorist nut job. And that it obviously came from a bat. Somebody ate a bat soup in a wet market or something along those lines is what they were pushing on us. And if you believed anything other than that, you were crazy. So then what we've seen now, fast forward again, is that suddenly the lab leak theory becomes a bit more palatable. People start exploring it a bit more. And now you've got the FBI and the Department of Energy coming out saying, we actually believe that it's more likely that this came from a lab than natural places. You've got now a lot of high-level scientists, a lot of experts saying this seems to have come from a lab. So if now we think that there's a good possibility it came from a lab, what happened? And in the beginning, these two scientists, as well as a few of their colleagues, believed that the virus came from a lab. What the hell happened when Fauci and Collins started talking to them that made them suddenly change their tune and tell everybody that they were conspiracy theorists if they thought otherwise? So we're going to watch. This is about a 6-minute video. This is really going to give you the gist of this hearing, the types of questions that were asked. This is Representative Nicole Maliotakis. She's a representative for New York City's 11th district. She's one of the only 2 Republicans in New York City. She did a great job questioning these two scientists. Here it is.
Dr. Andersen, do you believe that the former CDC director, Dr. Redfield, is a conspiracy theorist? Yes or no? Yes or no?
I think to the question of whether the former director is a conspiracy theorist is not really something I have thought about. So
well, I don't know,
like
because
to
you
label
just accused
people as
everyone who believes that there was a lab leak to be a conspiracy theorist. And back in March, the former director of the CDC, Dr. Redfield, came before this committee, and he said that it was not scientifically plausible that the virus went from a bat to humans and subsequently became one of the most infectious viruses in history. When asked why he was excluded from the February conference call that both of you, as well as 10 other scientists, had with Dr. Fauci, Dr. Redfield told us that Dr. Fauci wanted a single narrative surrounding the origins of COVID. But both you and Andersen Garry also expressed concerns about the genetic makeup of the virus just days before the initial draft of this paper came out. So were you both conspiracy theorists at that time? On January 29, 2020, Dr. Fauci emailed you after you had expressed concerns to him on a phone call that you believed COVID would have been engineered. He told you that if this was true, you had to contact the FBI. You did not do that, correct?
I believe the email says that he will contact the FBI.
Okay. Do you know, either of you had contact with the FBI? Yes or no, to your knowledge?
At the time, no.
Okay. But then you reaffirmed those engineering concerns in an email to Dr. Fauci, which you say the unusual features of the virus make up a really small part of the genome, and that after discussions earlier today, Eddie, Bob, Mike, and myself all find the genome is consistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. Again, were you a conspiracy theorist at that time? And did you share these same concerns on the February 1st conference call? Because Dr. Garry went so far as to say, quote, I really can't think of a plausible natural scenario when you get from the bat virus or one very similar to it, COVID-19, where you insert exactly 4 amino acids, 12 nucleotides, and all have to be added at the exact same time to gain this function. I just can't figure out how this gets accomplished in nature, unquote. So then, within a matter of days, something changed. And that's what this committee is trying to get to the bottom of. What happened within that 3-day period between the conference call and the paper that all of a sudden you did a 180 and it couldn't possibly come from a lab, or maybe, but you're all saying that, you know, this was by sure from nature. What happened in those 3 days?
Well, we examined the genomes more closely. We looked at other coronaviruses, and there was some new data that came. Where did
that data come from?
The scientific literature, you know, the publication of the pangolin genomic sequence showed that there was a receptor binding domain that was very close to the...
And exactly what my colleague here brought up.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
and it was a very important piece of data because it showed that a lot of the theories about, you know, the virus having been engineered or put together in a laboratory were not true, because here was a virus in nature that had a receptor binding domain with exactly the same structure.
I just find it all interesting based on what my other colleague here, the chairman of the committee, said with reply to the issue of the penguins. But something else that happened between those 2 days is one of your colleagues, who's not here today but was invited, Dr. Rambut, he said, I don't know if I should say this in committee room or not, but given the blank show that this would happen, if anyone seriously accused the Chinese of even accidental release, my feeling is we should say that given there is no evidence of a specifically engineered virus, we cannot possibly distinguish between natural evolution and escape, so we are content with ascribing it to natural processes. His concern was, would he piss off China? That's what his concern was. So look, something happened here. Politicians may flip-flop. Scientists do not flip-flop in a matter of 72 hours. And whether it was the fear of accusing communist China for this leak, whether it was needing to get the FBI involved in what that might lead to down the line, whether it was the fact that millions of US dollars had made their way, by the way, to communist China. Interesting chart I have here, $3.7 million. Were any of you aware during any of these, whether it was drafting this paper or conversations with Fauci, that communist China received $3.7 million of American tax dollars, including to the Wuhan Institute of Virology? Was that ever come up in any conversations with Dr. Fauci?
It did not.
Okay. Dr. Andersen, no?
It did not, and while I was aware of some of the work, I was not aware of the funding going, because that is obviously irrelevant to understanding the origin itself. I should point out, though, that in terms of labeling people as conspiracy theorists, is that considering a potential lab leak is a perfectly reasonable and scientifically justified question to ask. I myself have asked it. I have not called people that believe or think that this could have come from a lab conspiracy theory.
Okay, well, I'd like to just take my time back because I've run out, and I just only want to acknowledge that it's not just Dr. Redfield, right? We had the Department of Energy come out with their conclusion that they believe it was likely from a lab. It is the FBI that also says it was likely for a lab, and I just wanted the record to reflect that. Thank you.
So, you know, look, I'm not big on the whole communist China rhetoric, only because though it's maybe accurate to say, it's still, I believe, warmonger language. I think a lot of Republicans, what I worry about is, you know, we see Democrats definitely warmongering us into Ukraine. But on the flip side, I see a lot of Republicans trying to warmonger us into being at odds with China. And I think they're a competitor. I think that with China, we do need to, there is a different culture and we have a culture that we should want to protect, and a lifestyle that we should want to protect here in the United States that's very different than China's culture and their governmental structures. So I don't see any problem with wanting to protect our way of life and they protect their way of life. I just don't think that we should be warmongering when it comes to China, because I think that would be a much more dangerous foe than Russia could ever be to us. And so I have a hard time with just the language, just the rhetoric, communist China, communist China. And sometimes these hearings tend to, when you listen to them, they tend to go in that direction where it's just clearly meant to, you know, China's the bad guy. How dare you collude with China, the bad guy? And one day we're going to be at war with China, and that day might be sooner than later. But besides that rhetoric, it is a really good question. What happened with these scientists that they suddenly flipped, and that their opinions went from saying, we think this might be a lab leak, to suddenly, nope, it's not, and you're definitely a conspiracy theorist? And what we know is that there was a chain of emails that went back and forth. January 31st, Fauci received an email from Jeremy Farrar, that's the director of the Wellcome Trust, saying, Tony, we would really like to speak with you this evening. And then Fauci said, or Fauci's assistant, I think, said, we'll call shortly. Then after the call, apparently says, thanks, Tony. Can you phone Kristian Andersen? That's the doctor that was there at the hearing. He says he's expecting your call now. The people involved are Kristian Andersen, Bob Garry, Eddie Holmes. And then he says that, and these are the people that then, after speaking to Fauci, after speaking with the team, then suddenly changed their mind, and they wrote an article called Proximal Origin, where they discussed that, this definitely came from nature, and this did not come from a lab. So they even wrote a paper, they published a paper basically almost to do damage control for their original viewpoint of thinking that it may have come from a lab, and the people that they told that it may have come from a lab, they then did this damage control by putting out this article. So what we know is that series of events happened, that there was a lot of back and forth, there was a lot of meetings, there was a lot of exchanges, and these guys ended up changing their mind, and that's what these Congress people are trying to get to the bottom of. So we will keep you posted, of course, as to how these COVID hearings are going. I don't expect anything to come from them. I would love to see somebody be held accountable. I'd love for them to actually get to the bottom of really what happened with COVID, the origins of COVID. But instead, what we're seeing, as I mentioned, is you've got Republicans just using it to posture against China. Democrats, it doesn't seem, when you listen to these hearings, they're all saying, no, it came from nature. And all the Republicans are saying, no, it came from a lab. And it's just politicized rather than people actually wanting to get to an honest, good faith, finding out what actually happened. Just get to the truth. I don't need you to politicize it and be one side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle. We just want to get to the truth of this. And unfortunately, these types of hearings, when we watch them, they're interesting. I think we do get some answers, but we don't have any accountability because there's just too much politicization. And a lot of times these politicians are just looking to get their snippet, their social media viral snippet, and they're not actually looking out for what is in the best interest of the American people. And more importantly, what we really want is we want this to never happen again. Not only do we want to know about what happened, we just never want it to happen again. So they're not really, we'll see what this House Oversight Committee ends up doing, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. That's for sure. All right. I'm somebody who doesn't sleep well. My dog, my poor little dog Scarlet, she's not a little dog. She's actually a big dog. She's like a 180-pound shepherd, but she's got those aches and pains because she is such a big girl. And that is why I looked into cbdistillery.com for a natural way to help me get some sleep and also to help Scarlet get the relief that she needs. CB Distillery has over 2 million satisfied customers. When people use CBD, 90% of them report that they sleep better. Lots of people sleep better with CBD. 81% said CBD helps them with stress. 80% said CBD helps with aches and pains after physical activity. So if you struggle to get a good night's sleep, if you're dealing with too much stress, I think most of us are, you need a little calm in your life. If you suffer with pain, discomfort, especially after physical exercise, try CBD from the source that I trust, cbdistillery.com. And you're going to get 20% off your order when you enter my name, Kim, at checkout. There is no prescription required. That's, once again, cbdistillery.com. Promo code Kim for 20% off.